Hello, I'm Ernest Borgnine. I'm here to tell you a story about the American West. It's about this land and the conflict that took place between those who wanted to keep it and those who wanted to take it away. It's a story of memory and myth and the truth that lies between the two. Watch.
Ki kista, ni nex, nixokoa. Hanatusi, kamox, spomokan.
Darrell Kipp is one of those who helps keep the memory of the Blackfeet alive. He is heir to an epic story in which tragedy and courage have mingled in the struggle for a continent and for survival.
Yet, today as I look, you almost can hear the gunshots and hear the people yelling at you and see them running for their lives. And yet, today, very little has ever been said or mentioned about this place.
Barely 100 years ago, the frontier vanished, its reality actually replaced by legend. Join me and Jean-Christophe Joffre on the Jules Verne Adventures team's new voyage of today. From Wyoming to northern Montana, we'll travel beyond the legend and meet the reality of the tribe that lives at the base of the world's backbone, the Blackfeet. Here is the story of two cultures, opposed in every way. One land, two visions, in tragic collision. Northwest Montana, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Darrell Kipp takes Jean-Christophe Joffre to a site forgotten for more than a century. They follow the meandering and peaceful course of the Marias River. They are traveling back through time to a past so recent that Darrell himself has known some of its protagonists. In 1870, the Blackfeet make winter camp on the banks of their favorite river. Here, their pacifist chief, Heavy Runner, has his people pitch their teepees for the season. Colonel Eugene Baker, commanding a detachment of the 2nd Cavalry, has been ordered to make punitive raids against another Blackfeet leader, a warring rebel called Mountain Chief. But the soldiers have failed to find Mountain Chief's camp. Determined to punish Indians, any Indians, they attacked the village of the peaceful Heavy Runner, Ironically, Heavy Runner is one of the few chiefs who has signed a peace treaty with the United States, and his is a village not of warriors, but of women, children, and elders.
Heavy Runner takes the paper from General Sully that he had, and he went out and he was waving it at them and telling them that this was the camp of Heavy Runner, who was at peace with the government. Heavy Runner walked from his lodge waving this paper. A shot was fired that killed him. The many acts of heroism and desperation, fear, probably anger, frustration. As the people ran, mothers, children, old men, would run into this river, had ice stacked up against the shores. And they would crawl into this ice and hide. And the soldiers then came through the camp, and they began to tear the camps down and began to kill the people inside. Now, a very conservative record says 173 women and children were massacred that day.
Miraculously, Heavy Runner's 3 children survived the slaughter. Joe Kipp, a regimental native scout under Colonel Baker, decides to adopt the slain chief's children, and one of them, Laskin, was Darrell Kipp's grandfather.
One of the reasons I feel comfortable coming here to show people and talk about this site is that I think if people all over would understand some of the events that took place in our tribal history and other tribes' histories throughout North America, they might begin to get a better understanding of Native peoples in this country.
The Marias River Massacre, unknown even to most historians, is only one in the long series of tragic conflicts between white men and Native Americans, provoked by American expansionism.
It's a complicated history, now mingled with legend. To understand the Marias River disaster, we must go beyond the myth, go to the other side of the mirror. We must follow the trails of the pioneers and explore the frontier, that invisible and constantly moving line, pressed forward by the settlers' courage as well as their greed for land.
By 1870, the 5 main trails across the West have taken pioneers to California and Oregon. The frontier was the borderline between civilization and wilderness. Towns were growing along this sensitive line, outposts on the edge of largely unknown territory considered haunted by so-called hostile tribes. To help us understand this tense but exciting period, we look to the perspective of one of the most celebrated of all Western legends, a man who lived long enough to witness the most significant glories and tragedies of the Old West. He was a Pony Express rider, a heroic scout, and a friend to the Indians.
Barely 300 miles from the Marias River, at the edge of Wyoming's Yellowstone National Park, is a town named after the American Army's most famous scout, William F. Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill. Cody knew the Plains Indians better than almost any other white man of his time. we meet with Paul Fees, historian of the Old West and curator of the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, which houses one of the world's finest collections dealing with pioneers and Plains Indians.
There are a couple of things about Buffalo Bill that made him stand out. One is that undefinable thing we call charisma. He was someone that other people always described as handsome, as engaging, as modest. We don't think of that when we think of Buffalo Bill, but we hear other people describe him as modest, and yet somehow magnetic. People were drawn to him. The second thing is, he was absolutely authentic. The things that he showed in his Wild West show or in his stage plays were burlesques of what he had really done. It really wasn't until the 1960s that researchers looked up his real war record in the National Archives and discovered that the things he did were far more dramatic than the things that were portrayed on the stage.
Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, created in 1882, offered a mythic, romantic vision of the Old West. Inspired by Cody's own adventures, it was drenched with nostalgia, action, and historic heroism. The circus show, in some sense, was the first Western, and it was a colossal success. The show's triumph was due to the authentic Native American warriors who surrounded Buffalo Bill in the arena, and to one in particular, Sitting Bull, the most famous Indian leader of them all. His name alone struck terror in audiences. His appearance in the show as a kind of a tamed savage was tinged with tragic irony, yet was a sincere tribute from Cody to his Plains companion.
In the time of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, Cody and others thought that the Old West was gone, was past. That was the premise of the Wild West show. The Wild West show showed things that had been, using the real players, of course, using real cowboys and real Indians. But nonetheless, they were portraying a way of life that they said was gone forever. And of course, in a way it was.
In the 19th century, it was theorized that Native Americans as a race were inevitably doomed to disappear.
I don't believe Cody believed that, but I do think that he felt that that the Indian way of life was a way of life that they should be allowed to preserve on their own terms. In other words, we shouldn't push them into being civilized. We should allow them to retain their customs and to live their lives as they saw fit.
Cody had too much respect for the Indians to take part in the federal government's treaty negotiations, most of which were eventually abandoned, broken, or manipulated to the detriment of Native Americans.
Cody was quoted several times in interviews as saying that the most important thing to getting along with the Indian was to keep your word. He said that in his judgment, almost all of the problems that occurred with Indian people were problems caused by the American people breaking treaties or encroaching upon treaties. He felt that the government did not do a very good job of protecting the reservations or protecting the treaties, the hunting treaties.
In 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty imposes borders on Plains Indian Territory, with their buffalo herds being slaughtered wholesale by white hunters, the tribes are beginning to starve. Deprived of their lands, their way of life, and their freedom, the tribes try to find a new existence on the reservations. In 1876, in an act of desperate resistance, Sitting Bull leads a huge assembly of Indians. Some 7,000 in all, mostly Lakota and Cheyenne, off the reservations and into the sacred Black Hills. General George Armstrong Custer of the U.S. Cavalry is charged with forcing Sitting Bull back to his reservation. Sitting Bull and his people have set up a huge summer settlement along the Little Bighorn River.
The hills above the river are now preserved as a national monument. We meet with John Donner, Little Bighorn Battlefield National Park Ranger.
Welcome to Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. We're at the site of Custer's last stand and the famous Battle of the Little Bighorn in southeastern Montana in the United States. This is a site where Custer's 7th Cavalry engaged 1,500 to 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne during the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Custer's scouts try to warn him that he is outnumbered.
The women and children were out picking wild turnips. The young boys in the village were out tending the horses. Custer's command marched all the way from North Dakota, from Fort Abraham Lincoln, 40 days to get here on horseback to fight here and die in the Little Bighorn Valley.
After the first gunshots, 2,000 Indian warriors engulf Custer's 300 horse soldiers.
Right now, as we speak, this battle was being fought right here on this hallowed ground here.
Then Crazy Horse enters the battle, galvanizing his warriors with an unforgettable battle cry.
Remember the helpless ones. And he took a part in the battle. Hoka-hey, charge, charge. It is a good day to die. And remember the helpless ones. And he rode across the Little Bighorn River. When the warriors started to whittle down the command, they started to retreat back to the top of Last Stand Hill, right up behind me here. And that's where Lieutenant Colonel Custer was found, along with 41 fellow cavalrymen. And they were members of all 5 companies. So survivors of all the 5 companies on the battlefield would rally at that single point for the famous Custer's Last Stand.
Custer's death shocks the nation. So-called savages have defeated the elite of America's modern army.
This is the ultimate clash of cultures in American Western expansion, where we have 2 different dichotomous attitudes of the use of the land, each side fighting for what they thought was right here. The Lakotas and Cheyennes who were encamped in this Little Bighorn Valley floor also would pay the ultimate price too. They lost loved ones, family members in this battle. They won the battle, but they lost the war. This can also be called Sitting Bull's last stand, because the United States Army would renew the campaign with much vigor, and it was the end of an era and an end of the frontier, a last glow of a passing nation.
After years of congressional debate spurred by Native American activists, the official name of the battlefield was recently changed from Custer National Monument to Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument.
Several years after Little Bighorn, the aging Sitting Bull is accused of unlawful agitation on his own reservation. His accusers charge him with encouraging the forbidden ghost dance. Some Indians believe that the ritual of the ghost dance will bring a return of the old ways. The dead will rise again. the buffalo will return. The white man will vanish. Initially, Buffalo Bill Cody is asked to persuade Sitting Bull to come in for talks. But the president, misinformed by his military advisors, recalls Cody and orders Sitting Bull arrested. On December the 15th, 1890, on the Standing Rock Reservation, an Indian policeman is sent to arrest Sitting Bull. There is resistance by the chief's followers. In the melee, Sitting Bull is murdered. Over the course of a single generation, William Cody witnessed the extinction of a way of life. His memories bloomed in his epic and romantic depiction of adventures now lost in the new century of machines and commerce. Those adventures would survive only in westerns and in the innermost reaches of our collective imagination. William Cody died in 1917 at the age of 71.
Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce to you a Congress of the Rough Riders of the World.
At the vanguard of advancing civilization, boom towns grew quickly to serve not just settlers but speculators as well. Gold. Gold became the ultimate object of desire, but even greater fortunes could be made by servicing, and most times fleecing, the prospectors who flocked westward. And then, once the rush was over, bustling cities could turn into ghost towns virtually overnight.
Nevada City, Montana, is the largest surviving ghost town of the Old West. Shops have remained just as they were when the gold ran out. John Ellickson has been guarding this town for almost 40 years. Nevada City changed his life forever. As he guides us into the secrets of his ghostly town, it's hard to believe we're in the 21st century.
The gold rush, I suppose, is the biggest thing that happened here. This was the biggest gold strike in, some say, the history of the world for the concentration of the gold. They took out $100 million worth of gold when it was $16 an ounce, and some more when it was $32 an ounce. And so it's $2.5 billion in today's money, approximately, that was removed from Alder Gulch in placer gold, free gold that was simply there, supposedly, for the taking.
Gold could certainly put money in a prospector's pocket, but the real bonanza went to big mining companies. Storekeepers, who made the fastest profit of all, were the first to abandon Nevada City when the gold bubble burst.
Today, John is the only customer to haunt the grocery store, the barber shop, and the saloons. Since prices haven't been raised in 100 years, John is on friendly terms with all the merchants.
Simmering with excitement, Nevada City, like other boom towns, witnessed extremes of both violence and adventure. Cowboys, corrupt sheriffs, stagecoach robbers, gunfights, furious nights brightened by honky-tonk pianos in saloons. Western movies did not exaggerate the excesses of life in frontier towns.
What is the spirit of pioneers?
Oh, I think the pioneer spirit was mainly a spirit of freedom that brought the people to this country to begin with, and then brought them out to the West, where they were free of the laws of the intense society, perhaps. They were free to make their own lives into what they wanted. This spirit of freedom, I think, was what drove the pioneers.
With nothing to hold them, pioneers could keep moving from town to town to lands they considered theirs for the taking. And soon, the wagon trains that had toiled so painfully across the prairies would be replaced by a new kind of train that would change the course of Western history. The Indians called it the Iron Horse, its long plumes of black smoke heralding the arrival of more white men and more decades of anguish for native peoples.
Jack Frost and Bob Bettman are modern railroad engineers snaking their way across the North American continent. In Nevada City, they have discovered a gem which reminds them of the glorious days of their grandparents.
I guess there's nothing like the smell of steam. There's nothing like the pull of the throttle. It hesitates a minute, and then this engine has a lot of power. It wants to go. The whole operation is different. It isn't an internal combustion engine. This machine is alive. We breathe fire into it. We have to light it. We have to maintain it. We have to take care of it. It's temperamental, and it'll do exactly what we want it to do. If the way we treat it, it treats us back. I think that those people, my great-great-grandfathers, came across here as pioneers. Those people broke the country for us. And to me, this is part of what the history of the country is. It's the history of the West. It's the history of the pioneer period. The steam locomotive built America. If it wasn't for the steam locomotive, America wouldn't be what she is today, no doubt.
The railroad radically overturned the lives of the Plains Indians. Their land would no longer be answering the needs of a handful of settlers, but of hundreds of thousands of men and women who wanted to live, farm, and remain on the land. Almost every contact brought more conflict. To settlers, the Indians did not own the land because they did not use it. They were an obstacle to progress and expansion. For the Indians, their whole way of life was at stake, and the freedom also to walk their own land, the land of their ancestors. Kill the buffalo. Every dead buffalo is a dead Indian. This was the credo of American expansionists. Yet the buffalo gave the Plains Indians everything they needed: food, clothing, tools, even teepees. And it had great meaning in their spiritual lives. Government, army, and settlers all saw a strategic advantage in the decline of the great buffalo herds. Where the buffalo vanished, Indians vanished as well. When the first white man arrived, there were approximately 60 million buffalo in North America. By 1880, just a few hundred remained.
One dream from the ghost dance has come true: the return of the buffalo. From the few survivors, there are now thousands, and the species have been saved from the brink of extinction. Northwest Montana, 2 hours from the Canadian border, we are now traveling through the past, the present, and the future of the Plains Indians.
The Blackfeet Confederation consists of almost 30,000 people. The reservation encompasses almost 2 million acres. It is one of the largest in the United States.
Our arrival in Browning, capital of the Blackfoot Reservation, feels intense, as if we were entering a book in which all our imaginary heroes spring to life. This summer week in Browning is very special. These are the Indian Days, the days of the great annual Pow-Wow, which draws thousands of Plains Tribe members, all invited by the Blackfoot. The Plains Indians are survivors who reveal to us a truly complex perspective on America. Captured in the past by Edward Curtis's photographs or John Ford's westerns, our collective vision of Native Americans now faces a powerful new dimension: reality.
My name is Johnny, Tail Feather, Blackfeet. That's
Okay.
the Blackfeet Reservation here.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, another thing, there's a lot of Blackfeet on this the language.
In 1985, after traveling through North America to study American Indian languages, Darrell Kipp returned home to Browning to establish the very first schools to teach Blackfeet children their own language, a language that had almost died out.
We're used to looking at the pictures of the Indian or going to the museum to see the Indian, or we hear to see through native eyes. So we talk about the Native American like we talk about a photograph, or we talk about an artifact, or we talk about something that's static. So we tend to want to talk about seeing them. Let's go see the Indians. But as you know, equally important is to hear them. And the sounds of Native America and the sounds of our language are something to behold.
The Young Gray Horse Society was founded 40 years ago by traditional Blackfeet artists. Now, young people from 14 to 20 have learned to sing their tribe's traditional songs.
You always hear people say, save the redwood, save the whale, save the darter snail, save the spotted owl. And those are all good. We should save all living things. But it never occurs to anybody that a tribal language is living and deserves to be saved. And I use this analogy. If we think of our tribal languages as our grandparents, and we think of them sitting alongside the road, and we're coming along, and if we were to pass them by and refuse to help them, then we would be truly brutal people. So it isn't a matter of why do you save your language. The question is, you must save your language because they are your grandparents.
You're going to be on the rodeo? You're going to do the rodeo? Yeah.
I was thinking about it. I got $100
The grand entry kicks off every powwow, and the elders enter first. Not just any elders. These are American Indian veterans who fought during World War II, or in Korea, or in Vietnam. Thousands of them proudly wore an American uniform to defend America's colors. Paradox? Not at all. For Native Americans, this country was theirs before it was anyone else's.
George Kipp is another child of the Maris River who lives modestly on his farm. His past links him to the activism of Red Power. In the 1970s, this movement finally called the attention of the world to the dire living conditions of North America's native people.
We are needing our land back. Our land that we have here was not given to us. This land we owned. This is what we were able to keep through blood, sweat, and tears, through the almost annihilation of our people. We kept this one spot on earth for our tribe and for ourselves. And for the last 100 years, we've been passively, without resistance. This is where I want my children, my grandchildren, great-great-great-great-grandchildren to exist. And I'm not going to passively give that up no more. I'm not going to allow people to move on to my reservation and just take our land, because my ancestors, our blood was spilt for this land to retain it. Their bodies are buried here. This is our country. This is what we own. This is what our ancestors died for, and we're not going to passively relinquish it to nobody. One of the reasons I wanted to invite you over and take a look at this beaver pond and the trees and the hills and rocks and all the things that's here, it has a great representation to us Blackfeet people. It also gave us a governing way of life and secured a lot of our history.
disease, and the destruction of the buffalo herds came close to annihilating the Native American people. And those managing to survive these disasters were doomed to a death of the spirit, a lingering death brought about by the systematic obliteration of their customs, language, and ancestral beliefs. George Kipp takes Jean-Christophe Joffre to the Christian mission established on the reservation in 1890.
The education process was very, very extreme and very cruel. The children would be forcibly taken out of their homes and brought here. Their hair were cut, they were taken off their buckskins, because our people in those days still lived in a teepee. They were just coming out of the nomadic type of life, and none of them could talk English. And as young children, they were forced to. They was never allowed to talk Indian in this area here. If there was, they were punished, and the punishment they had was very, very cruel. There was related to physical abuse of, it would be a crime nowadays to what these children had to go through. There was stories of that graveyard way up there where there's a couple young children up there that were actually killed here. I talked to many elders about the ones that went to school here. My father-in-law is one of them, and their memories are not very great of that life. It was a shocking lifestyle and change for them. When coming from a home where there's nothing but love and kindness and respect into a Western setting of religion where there's nothing but cruelty and mandates and abuse, and these children they grew up in that environment, and it changed out our way of life. The civilization that preceded it could have been provided to us in a more easy manner, more meaningful, but this is what we was forced under.
Between 1883 and 1884, with the people completely dependent on an unresponsive government, starvation broke out on this once abundant land.
The starvation winter, it was a very devastating time to our people. It was just one of the last incidents in our history that was people do not like to talk about or remember. We don't know if it was planned or if it happened that way with the political structure and the actual appropriations to buy us our rations, so it never reached us. And it started in 1880, and then it kind of come to a severe head in the winter of 1883, 84. And we had nothing to eat at all by then, totally. But it was ironic because 12 miles over that way there was herds of cattle that were owned by non-Indians. But if we went out and butchered a cow, they would come in and they'd kill us and hang us. They figure close to, just in this area, this is just one little area out in here, that there was 800 out on them flats that spring. And they couldn't dig graves, too weak to dig graves, put them right on the ground. And they just lay them out there all over this ridge. They call it Ghost Ridge. And there was only about 1,600 of us Blackfeet left after that starvation winter.
What happened to the bodies?
The bodies just laid there. And then the government, they start collecting the human remains, and there was correspondence that we discovered where the agents and the different government officials here would go out there in the evenings and they'd start piling these bones and put them in boxes and ship them back to the Smithsonian Institute, and they would keep them and study them. They was trying to, one of their studies was they was trying to judge the thickness of our skulls. They'd take an Indian skull and pour sand in it and stuff like that. Anyway, they ended up with about 50,000 human remains in the Smithsonian. And a lot of the 800 that was buried around here went out there too. So it was, so there was a very devastating period.
So I believe it will change. A day is coming when it will change and they'll say, hey, you know, we did a great injustice to the American Indian and we're going to rectify it.
Cynthia Kipp is one of the reservation activists who campaigned for government recognition of Blackfeet rights, particularly in Glacier National Park, by having several of the park's natural sites renamed with their original Blackfeet names. Cynthia has won an important symbolic victory in her tribe's struggle for restitution of land sacred for thousands of years.
I believe we have an excellent future with our younger people getting a good, sound, quality education. I feel that here, that the Blackfeet, we are finally getting something that has been in American cities for years. What do you see out here? You see we're getting oiled roads. We're getting curbs and gutters and sidewalks. And this is the year 2000. Other cities across America have had them for over 100 years. We're finally getting them. We're getting street lights. We've finally got running water here in this town of Browning after the flood occurred of 1964. No one had water. So we have been deprived, but we have lived and still managed to be happy and to be healthy and to be friendly. It's good to be alive and well and happy and healthy in America, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Wouldn't live anywhere. We have the beautiful mountains, and of course it's cold in the wintertime, and it gets a little below zero, but we tolerate it, and this is my land, and this is where I grew up, and I love it very much.
Joe Kipp, Darrell's cousin, is one of Chief Heavy Runner's direct descendants. I asked Joe if the relative freedom now visible on the reservation might someday lead to the return of Blackfeet control over the land.
I'm going to speak about the Great Plains area. This part of Montana, Wyoming, South and North Dakota. In this arid climate, this was Blackfeet country, Gros-Ventre country, Assiniboine country, Lakota country, Cheyenne country. This whole great area. The area was homesteaded by pioneers about 120 years ago. The Indians were put on reservations. The farming is, most of these people came from the Ukraine area, and they were farmers from that country. And they were given a lot of free farmland to, the land was taken from the Indians and given to them, and they farmed it for many years. The problem is that the land is not, the land is productive, but there's not enough water out here. There's not enough rainfall. So for the past 55 years, the federal government has been subsidizing these farms, giving them money to grow the crops. Okay, but their population base has been shrinking considerably. The towns are getting smaller. The kids that come off those farms are moving away to the city because they can't make a living on the land. So their population is shrinking dramatically. There's only one people on the Great Plains that are thriving. That's Indian people. I'm very confident in the next 100 years that we're going to have this area, we're going to control this area with our vote, if nothing else. We'll be the dominant population of the Great Plains. And the reason is that we don't try to change the environment.
There is a mountain that looms larger than any other for the Blackfeet people. Chief Mountain. This sacred peak overlooks what the Blackfeet call the backbone of the world. at the heart of Glacier National Park.
We invited Joe Kipp to come see the sacred mountain from the perspective of Napi, creator of the world, as seen from the sky.
So all of our water comes from there. The water is life. It gives us life. Napi's our creator. He made that part of the world special. He made it very, very beautiful. And he left life there for the people. For people such as you and I and all the Blackfeet people to go up there and to get life just from being there, to get the energy of being alive.
Cynthia, George, Darrell, Joe, and all the Marias River children are entering a new millennium in America. Heirs to history, they are also guardians of an Indian dream, the oldest human dream, the dream of the eternal soul.
Today, all the people of our planet ought to look down upon the peaceful waters of the Marias River. There, in that shimmering mirror, is reflected the destiny of all who keep fighting for the best reason to live: freedom.
Hello, I'm Ernest Borgnine. I'm here to tell you a story about the American West. It's about this land and the conflict that took place between those who wanted to keep it and those who wanted to take it away. It's a story of memory and myth and the truth that lies between the two. Watch.
ki kista, ni nex, nixokoa. Natusi. Kamox. Spomokan.
Darrell Kipp is one of those who helps keep the memory of the Blackfeet alive. He is heir to an epic story in which tragedy and courage have mingled in the struggle for a continent and for survival.
Yet, today as I look, you know, you almost can hear the gunshots and hear the people yelling at you and see them running for their lives. And yet, today, very little has ever been said or mentioned about this place.
Barely 100 years ago, the frontier vanished, its reality actually replaced by legend. Join me and Jean-Christophe Joffre on the Jules Verne Adventures team's new voyage of today. From Wyoming to northern Montana, we'll travel beyond the legend and meet the reality of the tribe that lives at the base of the world's backbone, the Blackfeet. Here is the story of two cultures, opposed in every way. One land, two visions, in tragic collision. Northwest Montana, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Darrell Kipp takes Jean-Christophe Joffre to a site forgotten for more than a century. They follow the meandering and peaceful course of the Marias River. They are traveling back through time to a past so recent that Darrell himself has known some of its protagonists. In 1870, the Blackfeet make winter camp on the banks of their favorite river. Here, their pacifist chief, Heavy Runner, has his people pitch their teepees for the season. Colonel Eugene Baker, commanding a detachment of the 2nd Cavalry, has been ordered to make punitive raids against another Blackfeet leader, a warring rebel called Mountain Chief. But the soldiers have failed to find Mountain Chief's camp. Determined to punish Indians, any Indians, they attacked the village of the peaceful Heavy Runner. Ironically, Heavy Runner is one of the few chiefs who has signed a peace treaty with the United States, and his is a village not of warriors, but of women, children, and elders.
Heavy Runner takes the paper from General Sully that he had, and he went out and he was waving it at them and telling them that this was the camp of Heavy Runner, who was at peace with the government. Heavy Runner walked from his lodge waving this paper. A shot was fired that killed him. The many acts of heroism and desperation fear, probably anger, frustration. As the people ran, mothers, children, old men, would run into this river, had ice stacked up against the shores. And they would crawl into this ice and hide. And the soldiers then came through the camp, and they began to tear the camps down and began to kill the people inside. Now, a very conservative record says 173 women and children were massacred that day.
Miraculously, Heavy Runner's 3 children survived the slaughter. Joe Kipp, a regimental native scout under Colonel Baker, decides to adopt the slain chief's children, and one of them, Laskin, was Darrell Kipp's grandfather.
One of the reasons I feel comfortable coming here to show people and talk about this site is that I think if people all over would understand some of the events that took place in our tribal history and other tribes' histories throughout North America, they might begin to get a better understanding of Native peoples in this country.
The Marias River Massacre, unknown even to most historians, is only one in the long series of tragic conflicts between white men and Native Americans, provoked by American expansionism.
It's a complicated history, now mingled with legend. To understand the Maris River disaster, we must go beyond the myth, go to the other side of the mirror. We must follow the trails of the pioneers and explore the frontier, that invisible and constantly moving line, pressed forward by the settlers' courage as well as their greed for land.
By 1870, the 5 main trails across the West have taken pioneers to California and Oregon. The frontier was the borderline between civilization and wilderness. Towns were growing along this sensitive line, outposts on the edge of largely unknown territory considered haunted by so-called hostile tribes. To help us understand this tense but exciting period, we look to the perspective of one of the most celebrated of all Western legends, a man who lived long enough to witness the most significant glories and tragedies of the Old West. He was a Pony Express rider, a heroic scout, and a friend